Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the OffGridEnclave. Today we will be having a look at one of the key issues for solar systems that often get overlooked. I usually refer to this issue as the 5% rule. This applies to all solar systems, but is increasingly more important for off-grid systems. In fact, in my humble opinion, this rule is the most critical one that off-grid systems should design their whole electric around. So let's get right into it. What is the 5% rule and how exactly does it apply? For the sake of simplicity, I will be explaining things with a very basic model. Here we have the model of a very simple and basic solar system. And let's assume the solar panel has 1000 watts of theoretical maximum peak power production. Now of course there will be always a natural reduction of that. The sun angle, the angle of the panels, and all of these things do influence the theoretical maximum power. Let's assume the panels are put up quite nicely and you get about 90% efficiency from your solar panel. Now we are at about 900 watts of incoming power to our charge controller. From there on we have to do a bit of different math depending on what type of systems do you have. For simplicity, let's assume you have about a 3% loss rate, which gives us 875 watts of available power. That available power we can use to charge the battery or convert it straight to DC power and use it as it is available during the day. So far so simple, and this is the calculation that a lot of people go with. However, this all only applies on a very sunny day where the sun is hitting the panels straight. Reality, however, of the weather for most places around the globe is that these optimal conditions do not apply all the time. In the morning and evening hours, the sun does not hit the panels at the perfect angle. In winter, the sun is much lower than in summer. But these are minor problems compared to our main enemies: clouds, fog, rain, and snow. Now, a mildly cloudy day with only 1 or 2 layers of thin clouds will still give you about 70 to 80% of your solar power. However, during rainy days or days where you have multiple cloud layers or even a bit of fog, those numbers will quickly drop. And this is where the 5% rule comes into play. During prolonged periods of bad weather, rain, lots of clouds, snowstorms, things like that, you can expect to have about a 5% power output of your solar panels if you're lucky. In my many years of community works and helping people to live off-grid and build off-grid systems, I've found that the 5% is a mark where it is still possible to work with and live with. However, once the efficiency drops lower than 5%, it is usually an unwinnable uphill battle with solar panels, and one should use different energy sources. So far, so simple, but what does that mean for off-grid systems and where are the problems arising from that? If we design our off-grid household or dwelling in a way that we can run everything on the 5% margin that the solar panels give during a bad weather phase, however, that also means logically that during a good weather phase, you have about 95% spare power. Getting rid of the excess power is usually not that complex of a project. Mine some bitcoins, run some electric heaters for the house, or anything of that sort that burns off a lot of excess power on demand. This sounds very simple, but unfortunately a lot of people fail in designing the off-grid dwelling around that. When designing electric systems for the household, one should always have the 5% rule in the back of the head. It is also possible to build redundant systems that have two options. One option for the availability of a lot of power and another option when the weather is really bad. If one combines that with a gentle usage of generators to satisfy high demand devices like washing machines and such that have a rather limited runtime, it is quite possible to set up the off-grid living in a way that you can sustain during low power phases without any issues. When we go back to our simple basic solar system model, that means from our 1000 watt panels, we actually only get 48.5 watts during these phases. About 50 watts of usable power available from a panel that could in theory give 1000 watt is of course a big difference. You can see in these numbers that if you have a normal household consumption of let's say 300 or 400 watt, that already requires a sizable solar system to sustain during the 5% phase. One already requires around 9000 watt of solar power to sustain during the 5% phase if you use these 400 watt of consumption. Of course, also always keep in mind that from this available power you also need to charge your batteries. But before we talk about the battery side of things, let's look at the input side and why overpaneling is so important. For the reason I just explained, you can see that quickly the numbers of solar panels you need to sustain a medium household can be unexpected high. You should always try to max out the available input power of your off-grid inverter, hybrid inverter, or whatever charge controller you use for your solar system. Speaking of inverters, this is a good time to highlight that the guys over at Datu Boss gave the OffGridEnclave community a 10% price reduction for their products. I'll put the link of their shop as well as the bonus code in the description down below. They have a nice selection of batteries, inverters, all-in-one systems and all of that for a competitive price. I am using their 6 kW 48 volt hybrid inverter, on which I will be doing a detailed video soon. Now let's look at the battery side of the solar system for the 5% rule. To sustain off-grid living with solar as the main power source, it has become a good rule of thumb to design your system that with these 5% available power you can charge your batteries within 5 to 6 hours. However, if you look at the other side of the coin, you also need to limit the amount of power that the charge controllers put into the battery. If you have very simple charge controllers that do not have the feature to limit the power brought to the battery, you can quickly run into the issue that with a good day and the amount of power coming in, you will grill your batteries. Always double check the numbers that the amount of power you have coming from your charge controllers to the battery does not exceed the battery's rated charging amps. For most off-grid systems, that means you end up reducing the maximum charge amount in the charge controller. During the bad weather phases, it is generally recommended to run high power devices like a washing machine on a generator, as they are only run a limited amount of time and that is quite easy to manage. During that time, when the generator is running already anyhow, if the generator is not maxed out, it is recommended to connect your hybrid or off-grid inverter and let the AC/DC charger charge the batteries with a good amount of blast to fill up much required reserves. So, to summarize the 5% rule, you need a lot more solar panels than you thought you needed. Make sure you don't grill your batteries. Always have a backup like a generator. And most important, design your household to run on the low power phase if need be. If you have any ideas, questions or further input, don't be shy, hop on our Discord. I'll put the link down there in the description. With that, let's wrap things up. Thanks everybody for watching. Leave a comment, like or subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Have a great day and make it count.